What's up, Dragon Brood? Well, I'm sure by now, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you're aware that there's been some ban announcements. And these weren't shocking in any way, and they weren't surprising because we were told there was going to be some announcements to multiple formats today whenever they made the changes to the Pauper format last week. So we've kind of been sitting around wondering how far they would go and would it be enough? Well, let's talk about it. Okay, well, let's start out talking about Legacy. I mean, they decided to ban Ragavan finally, and that's not a huge surprise. Like, this is a card that when it came out, honestly jumped right into the top echelon of best 1-mana creatures ever. And on top of that, it has Dash, so you can somewhat protect it, which is even sillier. But it has so much value in the sense that it gives you both a treasure and the option to play an additional card. That's a lot for 1 mana, and for whatever reason, it happens to be a 2-1 instead of a 1-1. So the card is really damn good. So it didn't surprise me that it was showing up in tons of decks in Legacy. Even decks that you wouldn't normally consider playing it were making room for it because, well, it's just that damn good. And to no surprise, it had to be dealt with. Now, it is starting to be a little bit of a menace in other formats, but not to the same level that it has been in Legacy. So I kinda understand leaving it alone elsewhere, but the banning in Legacy seems reasonable. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think I've really seen anybody complaining about it thus far today, which is another reason I kind of let this play out a little bit during the day before I put up the video, is that I kind of wanted to see what the general, I don't know, just the temperature of the room is after these fell through, just to give it a little bit more context. But yeah, so far everybody seems pretty happy with this one, and it actually makes a lot of sense. As always, the people are going to be the most upset are the ones who spent like $50 or $60 acquiring one to play in their Legacy deck, but I mean, we all kind of knew there was a chance that this was going to go the way of the dodo. Now, Historic got some changes, I guess we'll call it that. I mean, technically Memory Lapse ended up banned, but it was already on the suspended list, which is basically the same thing. Though that would just mean if this were a rare, we would now be getting wildcards back for it or whatever. However, I don't really know, like, yeah, just give everybody wildcards anytime a card gets changed or nerfed or whatever. Like, that just seems like the reasonable thing to do. And I'm going to keep bringing it up until it changes because I know it's not going to change, but I think it's a discussion we need to have. But anyway, outside of that, the only thing that really happened in Historic was that they decided they were going to rebalance, as we're calling it, to Fairy, and then it is now legal again. So, we'll see if it makes a difference or not. We'll talk more about the rebalance to Fairy on the upcoming Alchemy updates video because there was a lot to go over in that, and I kind of felt that these deserve to be separate videos because those are very different discussions. But yeah, not much really in Historic other than these two changes, and that's kind of what we expected. Historic seemed to be mostly okay with the changes so far. I haven't been playing much on my channel, but I've been watching some other people playing Historic, and it seems mostly okay for the time being, so I don't think this is going to be a big deal to rock the boat one way or the other. Alright, let's talk about Standard now. Alrund's Epiphany finally banned, right? I want to say we knew, but I kind of felt like at this point they weren't going to do it, and we were maybe going to get other things around Alrund's Epiphany banned. Maybe Galvanic Iteration or something of that nature, but they decided this has kind of been enough. And here's one of the things I want to say from just experience level, right? And this goes all the way back to, oh gosh, I guess original Mirrodin, right? When there was a banning on a bunch of artifacts and artifact creatures and whatnot. Now, when we did that, you ended up banning at the time, I believe it was a bunch of the artifact lands and one of the other cards, right? And we left Arcbound Ravager, which was kind of the boogeyman representative of that deck and being overpowered. And I remember at the time, players still not wanting to come back and play because that card existed. Even though it was basically cut off at the knees, it was still usable, but it was definitely not powerful by the same levels with a lot of those other cards gone within the context of the format. But people didn't want to hear that, right? You have to remember that a lot of the casual to mid-level players just see what they see. They're not top-level players. They're not looking at tournament play. They're not doing all these other things. They're just seeing what they see. And to that extent, the thing that represents that deck is the thing that becomes the spokesperson, if you will. So as long as that's around, people are going to be upset. I'm not sure these are exactly the same, but it feels a little bit that way. And I bring that up to say that, like, had they just banned everything else around Epiphany, the existence of Epiphany, I think, still would have kept people away. Because the one time you lose to it, or a deck that plays it, and to be fair, I have some decks that I'd put together here on this channel that weren't Is-It decks that still played Epiphany, right? So it's still going to feel bad when you lose to it. And that's just not what you want to have around. So whether we think it was balanced or reasonable or not, I don't think it really matters. It kind of had to go. And understandably so, because nobody wants to sit and lose when you don't get another turn for 4 turns or 5 turns or whatever it is, right? It kind of makes sense. I just wasn't sure they were going to do it at this point. I felt like we'd reached the point where they'd let it sit around so long that they just decided it was going to be good to go. Maybe there's other stuff that copy spells or not in Kamigawa that was going to make it worse. Who knows? Like, we'll find out in another couple of weeks. But yeah, Alrund's Epiphany, they finally did it. It's gone. It's banned. Now, speaking about cards around Epiphany, they did also ban Divide by Zero. And this was an interesting one because some people have sounded like they're a little upset that this one's banned, partly because they feel it's like skill testing. However, feels like a different argument, and I don't believe it's skill testing at all. Most of the time, you kind of knew what you wanted to do with it. But the thing about it is, it was able to work up the curve effectively, right? So it's a 3-mana card that could deal with pretty much any other card, not even just a permanent, right? Or it could counter a spell, pseudo counter, and it got you another card. Like, that's really good as an instant for 3 mana, and it had almost no restrictions. So I kind of get why this card was also a nuisance too. A card like this also keeps situations from developing, a certain decks from being played. Like, nothing that acquires counters or needs multiple turns to set up and work, it becomes effective when the environment's playing so many of this card. And to be fair, pretty much every blue deck I was playing, except for one, I think recently, played Divide by Zero. Like, the card is really just that good. Even decks I've tested that haven't been that good still were shoving Divide by Zero in there. So I completely understand. This card is super powerful. It is, you know, it's not like it's a rare or anything, but still, I think it carried a lot of value. And I kind of understand why it needed to be banned. So I'm not going to really be upset that it's gone, honestly. Now, the last one that may have actually surprised some people was Faceless Haven. And this is one I didn't really have on my radar at all, and I was a little bit surprised that it was on the list. But, you know, their explanation was basically that the top decks you're seeing are Is-It Epiphany and Mono White Aggro. And actually, I guess to some extent, Mono Green Aggro that also will play Faceless Havens. So that kind of put you in a situation that 2 of the top 3 decks are somewhat more viable because that card exists. And I kind of get it. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really strong card. It's really easy to activate. You're already getting a benefit now, not in Mono White, but in Mono Green, you're already getting a benefit for playing snow stuff anyway, so it's just kind of go ahead, toss it in there. Mono White, it's giving you just one more creature after you're already playing all the stuff that are efficient, that are exiling your opponent's things or whatever. Maybe your board gets swept and you're like, okay, great, well, I'm gonna attack for 4 easily, right? Whereas all the other lands that we have to activate from, what is it, Adventures in Forgotten Realms, those all have variable costs and variable power and toughness that make them better or worse than Faceless Haven. As an example, if you want to activate Hive of the Eye Tyrant, it only becomes a 3/3, whereas you could spend less mana to activate a Faceless Haven and get a 4/3, and it has Vigilance, so you could still tap it, right? That is a gigantic difference in the quality of the creature lands. So it'd be interesting to see what the environment looks like without Faceless Haven around. Now, that being said, it still means in Alchemy it's legal because we have a rebalanced version of it already. So don't think that's too big of a problem, but here, not available in Standard. So overall, how do I feel about these announcements? I think they were fine. I think this was a good one. I think this is enough to, at least until Kamigawa comes out, which is what, 2 or 3 more weeks, to shake up the environment a little bit. I think it will at least get people somewhat excited, or some of these brews people have been sitting on are now actually more playable, right? Because maybe you can play something that's a hair slower because Faceless Havens don't exist. Maybe some of those bigger creatures or reanimation decks or whatever you want to play become somewhat viable because Divide by Zero doesn't exist. Or you don't have to worry about Is-It Epiphany decks just taking a bajillion turns and trying to win out of nowhere, right? So the format really does shift a bit. Now, to what? I don't know. But we'll get to see. It'll be very interesting. So Does it change much for me in the content here on the channel? Probably not. I think we're going to keep doing what we're doing. There's maybe a couple of decks that were definitely worse a couple of days ago that get a little bit better now. So that's pretty good. So I may, some stuff I recently deleted, I may have to go dig back up. But overall, I don't have a problem with these. I think they're generally pretty positive. I know in general, if you don't like bans, you're not going to like this. So I can't really take that into consideration. But I'm just looking at the impact of the bans, and I think it should go the way we want it to. But Kamigawa was on the horizon, so we'll just wait and see. As always, let me know down in the comments below if you agree, disagree, if there's something else you wanted to see banned. Does this get you excited to play Standard? I'm kind of curious where everybody's head's at with this. Also, don't forget, if you'd be so kind, consider joining the channel for as little as 99 cents. And remember to like, share, subscribe, all that wonderful stuff. That's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.